We want to welcome you to this very important webinar. We're grateful that you have joined us, and I'm excited to have Israel Wayne of Family Renewal here with us today to help us understand the hostile takeover of America. Hundreds of people have signed up to get a better grasp of what in the world is going on and how did we get here. My name is Timothy Jensen, and I'm the executive director of Humble Shack, an organization that offers marketing and distribution services to nonprofits, a select group of authors, and those who resource the homeschool community. That brings me to the place where I support Israel Wayne and Family Renewal. And it's an exciting venture today to partner with Israel and this ministry to bring you some very important information, and not just information. I'm excited because Israel has an action plan. In fact, he's going to help us to not only understand what's happening with this takeover of America, but also give us an action plan so there's hope. 10 recommendations, in fact, for you and I to consider how to put into practice. So let me get out of the way. Israel, thank you for being here. And please tell us, how did we get here? And what can we do other than pray and vote?
Well, thank you, Timothy, and thank you to everyone who has joined in on this webinar. I am grateful that you're here because it shows that you care about our nation and you are concerned about the trajectory in which we're headed. These have been issues that I've been talking about and writing about for quite some time. In fact, I just want to read briefly from a blog that I wrote that I published September 1st of last year, 2020, on my Christian Worldview blog, which you can find at christianworldview.net/blog. A lot of people don't even know I have that site. It's a Christian Worldview and Apologetics website, and the blog focuses on a lot of social and cultural issues as well as apologetics issues. But I wrote this article, started it as some posts on Facebook in late August of last year, and then moved it over to my blog and sort of rounded it out on September 1st. And the blog article is called The Hostile Takeover of Cultural Marxism. And I'm just going to read to you a little section from this to give you a little background as to what I was saying back in August and September of last year. And you have to remember this was before the election, so no one knew how that was going to pan out. But this is what I said. Make no mistake, we are in the midst of a Marxist revolution. The sad part is it won't be bloodless, and we haven't begun to see the end of it. A real virus, whether created or organic, has been seized as the needed impetus to override the Constitution and shift power from the working middle class to the elites. The goal is to make citizens dependent on the government and afraid. We saw this with the creation of the Patriot Act and TSA. We saw it again in the federal bailouts of 2008 that unfairly benefited some corporations while facilitating the demise of thousands of others. Now the floodgates have opened, and I fear we'll never get them shut. Be prepared. I just want you to listen here. These are things that I was saying over a year ago we needed to be on the lookout for. Be prepared for mass mandatory vaccination laws. Greater expansion of control over private schools and homeschools, since most will soon take government money through federal school choice. The creation of more federal agencies, more government employees, and fewer private sector workers, more government tracking of individuals, increased control of information and suppression of dissent, especially by the billionaires who control social media, and a probable election debacle precipitated by alleged mail fraud because of millions of mail-in ballots. The Marxist progressives have tasted victory and now they are emboldened. The LGBTQ movement will stop talking about equality and start acting to punish dissenters. The America you and I were born into has been held hostage by cultural Marxists. Compliance is their goal, and we've been conditioned for it by decades of indoctrination in socialist government schools. Now, these are things, as I said, that I've been writing about, talking about, and warning people about for quite some time. And I just want to define a few terms here because I think sometimes we get a little bit confused about what some of these terms mean. So I'll start with cultural Marxism. And I guess, first of all, I should back up and define Marxism. But if you read Das Kapital and the Communist Manifesto by Marx and Engels, you see that they have predicated their economic theory on this disparity between the wealth and power of what they call the bourgeoisie, which is the ruling class, and the proletariat, which is the working class. And Marx's view was that the way to balance things in society economically is that you take by force from the wealthy ruling class and you redistribute it to the working class. We see this rhetoric every single day in Joe Biden's posts in social media. This is his entire agenda, talking about how we need to tax the rich and redistribute the money to the poor. Now, this is always a rhetoric that plays well because it sounds good on paper. The problem with Marxism is that Marxism and socialism is really a subset of Marxism. It's a lighter version of it. It's a few less calories than that more totalitarian version, but it's still the same thing. Socialism and Marxism are intricately joined together. They are really part of the same movement. But one thing that Marxism and socialism has never shown us is they've never shown us true equality in society. You never have an equal society where everyone shares all things and everyone benefits equally from labor. What you always have ultimately within Marxism is you have very, very wealthy elites at the very top, an oligarchy who controls everything, and then you have masses and masses of poor. So what Marxism always does is it eliminates the working middle class, and it shifts and polarizes society into an extremely wealthy ruling class who are Marxists, and then an expansive labor class, which is poor, who work for the elites. All you have to do is look at the former Soviet Union, look at Cambodia, look at Vietnam, look at North Korea, look at China, and so on and so forth. This is not something that is a theory in a vacuum. We actually have history to back this up. But when you look at the thesis that's presented by Marx, it is that there is this ruling class that is oppressors, and then there is the working class who are the people who are oppressed. So when we use the word Marxism, we're talking about an economic philosophy. Cultural Marxism is a bit broader and a little bit more difficult to define and understand than economic Marxism. But again, it springs out from economic Marxism. So what I would say is that almost all cultural Marxists are economic Marxists, but many of them are pushing a completely different agenda than economic reconstruction. So there are two basic ideas behind cultural Marxism. First is that it is predicated on that worldview of the oppressor versus the oppressed. And you will find that in feminism, where you have the woman who is oppressed and the male who is the oppressor. You find it in critical race theory, where you have the oppressor who is the white Caucasian, and the oppressed, which is someone who has a darker skin tone. And in critical race theory, of course, the idea is that you are intrinsically an oppressor or oppressed, not based on your actions. It has nothing to do with what you actually do. It has to do with how you're born. And you see it in all kinds of other ways, even environmental movements. You see this issue of the oppressor and the oppressed the landowner, of course, being the primary oppressor, and the state, of course, being the liberator who has to find ways to take the land from the wealthy landowner. That, of course, goes back to economic Marxism as well. You see it in the LGBTQ movement that heterosexual, straight individuals are oppressors, and anyone with a non-heterosexual sexual preference is oppressed. It goes on, but that's really, I would say, one of the primary undergirding foundations of cultural Marxism is borrowing from economic Marxism, this model of the oppressor and the oppressed. And so anywhere that we believe we find oppressors, we have to replace the hierarchy. We have to overthrow the hierarchy. Religion is seen to be intrinsically oppressive, and so we have to overthrow the oppressor by suppressing religion. I could go on and on. There's so many different expressions, so many different tentacles of cultural Marxism, but you have to remember that they really do come out of this idea of a tension between the oppressor and the oppressed. The other aspect of cultural Marxism, I mentioned there were two, is that cultural Marxism borrows from the revolutionary playbook of economic Marxism. And so when you look back at the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917 in Russia, there was this movement as the Bolsheviks were overthrowing the bourgeoisie, this ruling class, murdering Tsar Nicholas and his wife and their daughters, and then this just, blood in the streets revolution. There was a pragmatism that was implemented. And of course, pragmatism is the philosophy that whatever works is right, or the ends justifies the means, or it doesn't matter how you get there as long as you get there. And so this pragmatism drives cultural Marxism, where it is believed that it doesn't matter what methods you implement, whether you burn cities, whether you riot and loot, whether you shut down infrastructure, the kinds of things that we see with Antifa, Black Lives Matter, radical domestic terrorist groups. Their playbook is a Marxist playbook. It's a revolution playbook. And I talk about this in a seminar that I've done, a 2-hour teaching that has PowerPoint that really helps to be able to show you in a chronological sequence how we got here. And I want to encourage everyone after this to buy that seminar so that you and your family can be instructed in a more systematic way with names and dates and places and pictures and PowerPoint to show you how this has all played out. But one of the key players that helped to provide the rule book, if you will, for progressives, for leftist cultural Marxists, was a man named Saul Alinsky. And in the late 1960s and early 70s, he was writing these revolutionary documents that culminated in this publication of this book, Rules for Radicals. And Rules for Radicals was very influential in shaping the worldview of Hillary Clinton. She wrote that as about Saul Alinsky as her master's thesis in college, met Saul Alinsky, interviewed him a couple of times. And then also Barack Obama was trained as a Chicago community organizer by people who were trained by Saul Alinsky, who was a Chicago community organizer. And so within the Democratic Party today, we have people who are trained as cultural Marxists. And this is why the founders of Black Lives Matter have said, and you can look it up on YouTube, we are trained Marxists. Now, BLM is they're actually economic Marxists, very openly so, but they're definitely cultural Marxists. If you look on their website and you look at their About Us and What We Believe sections, and they say that their goal is revolution. They want to replace the traditional family. They want to abolish traditional concepts of gender identity. Very little actually on their website has to do with so-called race or bigotry or discrimination related to skin color. It's very much about just a Marxist takeover of society. You can see, of course, if you also look and see the multiple multi-million dollar homes owned by the founders of BLM, you can see the hypocrisy that Marxism always eventually exhibits, that they really don't push for equality. They're certainly not giving up their millions in order to help the masses. They are strategically working so that they personally benefit from the abolition of the middle class, the servitude of the working class, and then the lifting up of an elite few or oligarchy who control everything from the top. And so I want to be really careful that I emphasize, and I think there's going to be a link that we're going to post, that we as Christians need to be careful not to get into conspiracy. We need to not get into things that are not factual, things that can't be demonstrated and proven. There are some things that just simply are outside of the scope of what can be researched and factually verified. And I want to, and I wrote a whole article on that about Christians and conspiracy theories that I would encourage us to read as well, because I'm not advocating for us to go off the deep end into trying to find, terrible, horrible things that the government has done behind every bush. The thing is, you don't have to go off into conspiracies to find terrible, horrible things that the government does that's actually fact-based. The progressives have been very open. They have not been covert or secretive about their agenda. They've been very open about it, and they have been progressively moving our nation forward into a Marxist agenda. We've seen anytime that there's a crisis that the progressives use this, and I don't like that term progressives, it's their term, because they're actually regressive. They're bringing us into an economic dark age as a nation, but they use that term progressive to describe their ideology. But there's one aspect of it that's true. They always play offense, and what the Marxist, the cultural Marxist will do is they will have a strategy, they'll have a game plan. If we can think of it like a football game, they always play offense. Their goal is to throw a touchdown pass every time they have possession of the ball. And they relentlessly seek to move that ball up the field. Conservatives, on the other hand, and again, the name kind of implies that, they want to conserve or protect or defend. And those conservatives tend to just hold the line, hold the line, hold the line. The problem is they're constantly backing up, and they don't have an offensive strategy. The leftist liberals have synergy among themselves, so that even though they don't necessarily all like each other, they recognize the necessity of working together for a common cause, and they can set aside their differences and their ideological distinctives to move the ball down the field. So the environmentalists and the feminists and the abortionists and the LGBTQ and the economic socialists and all of them, they all work together to advance the agenda of cultural Marxism and work together. Conservatives tend not to do that. We have a habit of sort of shooting each other in our own foxholes because of petty little differences and disagreements. So what they do, what the cultural Marxists do, is they sit back and they wait for an opportunity. They will either create a crisis, which happens from time to time, where they'll manufacture a crisis out of fiat, out of nothing, just because they can, and then exploit that crisis. Or they'll just sit back and wait for a genuine crisis, whether that be a hurricane or natural disaster or a terrorist attack or a virus or who knows what, some sort of economic calamity. It doesn't matter whether they manufacture the calamity or whether they just capitalize on it. They know when people are in fear that this is the time for them to move forward. And there's just a natural principle of human nature that people will almost always exchange their liberty for security. And when they're afraid and when they fear for their safety, for their health and their economic prosperity, they will turn over their liberty and give that up in exchange for protection and security. Again, we saw it at 9/11, where people gave over their privacy through the NSA and the TSA where they gave over even their private electronic communications to being surveyed by the government through their cell phones, through wireless internet, emails, and so forth. They authorized being spied on by the government because they wanted to be protected from international terrorism. And so the same thing happens with things like the coronavirus, where people are afraid of illness, they're afraid of death, and so they will exchange their liberty in order to gain security. And there's, I think, an understandable element to that. The problem is that while many people believe, well, it's just a temporary crisis, if we give up our liberty in this moment, we'll be able to get it back later. When you look at it historically, that almost never happens. The government almost never gives back what they've taken, and Marxists don't intend to reinstate your liberty after the crisis is gone. In fact, the crisis is just a wonderful means to the end of taking your liberty away. And so we have a lot of things that are on the table right now. Obviously, our president and Congress, but the president in particular, even through executive orders, is just spending in an out of control manner right now, just spending billions and billions of dollars almost on a daily basis. Well, economically, that can't be sustained. And it's important for us to remember that the federal government doesn't have any money. It has no money. The only money that it has is that which it takes by force from its citizens, which Friedrich Bastiat, in his wonderful book called The Law, which I encourage you to read, called this concept legal plunder. Again, read The Law by Friedrich Bastiat. You have to read that fabulous short little book on economics, one that your whole family needs to read. We call this concept legal plunder. So that's one means that they can obtain resources, is by taking it from the citizenry. The other way that they can get it is to borrow it from other nations, which makes us enslaved to those other nations. The scripture tells us that the borrower is slave to the lender, and makes us beholden to these other countries. And then the other way that we can do it is simply to print more currency. Now, what people don't realize is that results in what is kind of like a hidden tax on the citizenry, because what makes money valuable, what makes anything valuable, is scarcity. And so when something is really scarce, it has value. And when there's plenty of a thing, then the value goes down. So the more money that gets printed and that gets flooded out there into the economy, the less value there is in the dollar and the less power there is in your purchasing. So what happens is it creates what's called inflation. And inflation drives up prices, consumer prices. And so what we see is things like what just happened in the building sector, where you had shortages of supplies because of government mandates that restricted manufacturing. So plywood and building materials were restricted in terms of their availability. But then also with just this influx of cash, with printing trillions of dollars and then just giving the money away through federal handouts, it has created inflation where the price of things has gone up to where, just using an example, a sheet of plywood went from $8 to $80 within a year. We're seeing the inflation at the gas pump, where the price of gas going up, the price of food is going up, the price of everything is going up. And what happens in hyperinflation is it means that you essentially can't really afford to buy hardly anything. The housing situation is going through the roof right now. People are selling their home for twice what it was worth 2 years ago. There's this seller's bubble right now that is being created by largely inflation and low interest rates. I don't want to get too deep in the woods here with the economics of this, but I was just talking with a friend of mine who's a real estate agent a couple of days ago, and then read an article this morning in Yahoo Money that was quoting a Yale economist, and both of them said the same thing, that really in about 2 years, we're probably going to see a major bubble burst because the economy can't sustain this. the banks have the federal government, and then the lending agencies between the federal government and the real estate companies, groups like Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae and those companies that we saw basically destroy our economy back in '08. The same entities have kept interest rates really low, so they're between 2 and 3% on home mortgages right now. So people are basically buying homes that they can't afford based on the interest rates because you know the rates are so low, so they're buying over their heads, so to speak. And as long as they're employed, they can keep making that payment. You know, they're maxed out on all their payments, but as long as they stay employed at the level of employment they are, they can keep making their payments. If anything happens to upset that apple cart, then they're going to lose everything. It's a very scary situation. But as soon as the feds decide, the Federal Reserve, who controls the interest rates that are loaned to the banks that loan to the banks that loan to the people, as soon as the Federal Reserve decides to raise interest rates, we're going to see a massive settling off of this housing boom. And if they raise it just a couple of points, we're going to see housing values absolutely collapse. And so trying to set this up a little bit just to give you an idea of where we're at. You guys have seen, if you've been out and about, the fact that if you go to a grocery store, you go to especially a fast food restaurant, you have to wait a half hour just to get a burger. Well, why is that? It's because these places can't employ people, because people don't want to work because they're getting government bailouts, and they make more money staying at home, getting paid by the government to not work, than they make to actually go work. What happens through all of this is that the government makes people dependent on them. And we saw during the COVID crisis, a whole bunch of small businesses, middle-sized businesses that just went out of business, were put under because they had strict regulations on them that they couldn't deviate from. And then the big corporations all found workarounds. So like in Michigan, for example, where I live, our governor gave an executive order shutting down all garden centers across the state. Well, of course, Walmart and Home Depot and Lowe's, these larger companies, well, they're able to stay afloat and keep selling items because, you know, these big billionaire companies cut deals with politicians, and really the socialist agenda goes to help these top companies as opposed to these smaller ones who don't have the leverage. And so, you know, we saw this huge loss of businesses all across the United States due to the excessive regulations put in place during the COVID lockdown. Again, these small businesses have had to resort to government bailouts or just completely go out of business. And what does all of that do? It creates dependency. People go on unemployment and they become dependent on the government, or they take the government subsidies, they become dependent on the government. And that is a primary goal of Marxism, is to create dependency where the citizens cannot sustain themselves, they cannot govern themselves, they have to basically become enslaved by the ruling class. So I've said a lot here. We're kind of at about the halfway point. I want to make sure that we leave enough time for the solution, not just the bad news, but where do we go from here? And then hopefully have time for a few of your questions as well. So Timothy, I think I'll throw it back to you, and then we can start talking about some of the solutions.
Israel, you have given so much fabulous information, so much perspective, history. One thing so many people I run into, and including myself at times, struggle with is a lack of understanding. If we just don't get the cause and effect, why things are happening the way they are, why are people believing this way, acting this way, that lack of understanding leads to a great frustration. It's no wonder the Bible tells us to seek after understanding and seek after wisdom. I'm so grateful you're sharing this with us. And I have posted in the chat window and answered a number of questions today already. There are links to the blog articles that Israel has referenced, the article on the hostile takeover of cultural Marxism, also his video that deals with two videos actually that deal with postmodernism, cultural Marxism, social justice, critical theory, and intersectionality. make certain you check out those particular features. And if anything, you want to find a home base, you can go to familyrenewal.org. That is the main website. There's also another website I'll throw up in there in a moment that is christianworldview.net. Israel does a lot of blogging there related to biblical perspective on cultural issues. And so I want to encourage everyone to do that. I've also put a link in there about the conspiracy theories and the Christian blog. And then also in there, I noted that the book he referenced, The Law, by Frederick Bastiat, is there. And I think you can even find a free PDF online of that book, and encourage you to read it. And I know my family and I will be looking at this as well. And you know, Israel, as you were talking, my mind raced on a number of things, and one of them, when you go back in our history of America and you think about Watergate, as I studied that, it was interesting how torn the nation was over the idea, yes, that this would involve the president and these things were done, but equally so, Americans were appalled at and conflicted because his privacy was invaded to get that conversation recorded. And so there was this outrage over that. And then you move forward, you referenced 9/11 and you know, the liberty security thing. Liberty and security rarely live together. You are right. And then you just come a little forward from 9/11, just 20 years in our whole history as a nation. And now people are paying to be listened to. I have a very wild story about that. My family was helping another family move. And in the process of helping them move, we took a break for about 10 minutes, sat down in the couch and a couple small pieces of furniture that were left in the living room area. And my wife was conversing with this lady. And the lady was sharing a little bit of her history with my wife. And she paused for just a moment, and Alexa piped in and said, I didn't know that about you. Whoa, the moment right there. It was like, I didn't even know Alexa was in the room. And, but yeah, it's an interesting thing to see where we've come to. Thank you for helping us unpack how we've got here, the influences, what's going on. But you have more than information for understanding. You have actionable steps that we can take. And I've shared the frustration, I think, of millions of people who have seen what's been going on. You listen to the TV, the social media, you even watch the conservative news, and what do? He said this, can you believe she did that, and da-da-da-da. The one thing always missing is an action plan. How do we change this? What do we do? Well, the answers are always pray and vote, pray and vote. And right now, the most recent poll still shows 54% of Americans don't believe that our voting system is reliable anymore. And so with so much of that going on, I'm refreshed to know you have some actionable steps as Christians we can consider and take. Would you share those with us?
Well, I want to make sure that I am not coming across in any way as being dismissive of prayer, because there are many things that we can do and should do, but nothing that we can do or should do ever supersedes the importance of prayer. Prayer is the most important thing we can ever do, and nothing that we do should ever be done apart from prayer. So I don't want anybody to feel that we're being dismissive of that in any way. It's just that as Christians, that's a given. We know that one. The voting aspect is increasingly difficult for a couple of reasons. Number one, you know, as much as some of my conservative friends like to disagree with me on this point, increasingly our two-party system represents socialists and light socialists. And so that makes it very frustrating, because even the people on the Republican side of the aisle are often about spending trillions of dollars and going into debt and creating big government programs that take away our liberties. And, you know, yes, they are a lighter version of the socialism than the heavy Marxist side in the Democratic Party. But increasingly, you know, both parties. I mean, what's interesting, you just go back a little ways into the 60s, John Kennedy today would probably fit squarely in today's Republican Party. That's just how far both parties have shifted. So anyway, but to get back to what we can do, I don't expect heathens to think and act like Christians. I expect heathens to think and act like heathens because that's what heathens do. But I do expect Christians to think and act like Christians. So my primary goal is to help us to stop thinking like Marxists, to stop thinking like socialists. And one way that we have to do that, of course, is renewing our mind. And I'm also very concerned about the next generation because our government school system is and has been for a very, very long time the largest indoctrination centers for Marxist propaganda in the world. And you know, we have exported through K-12 education and higher education Marxist ideas since the late 1960s. And we have a whole generation of people who are just saturated in Marxist thought. And let me just push in on this just a minute. You know, if I go to any church and I ask an evangelical Bible-believing Christian, do you support socialism? They say, oh, no, I don't support socialism. And I say, well, do you support public schools? Oh, yes, of course I support public schools. Well, you know, if you think about it, you don't find the idea of the government controlling education anywhere in the Bible, but you do find it in the Communist Manifesto, where Marx says we must replace home education with social. That's a direct quote from the Communist Manifesto. So the idea of a government-controlled school system is not a biblical thought at all. It is a Marxist thought. And the fact that Christians will defend it shows how deep fried they are in Marxism without even realizing it. Or I'll ask them, do you support government paid for social programs like government housing or government welfare? Well, yeah, we have to do that because we want to be caring and loving. Jesus loved people and we want to love people. Well, of course we want to love people, but Jesus never said that the government should take by force to redistribute charity to other people. You know, stealing from one person to give to another person is never sanctioned in Scripture. It is sanctioned in the Communist Manifesto. Or do you support government health care? Well, yeah, we have to have government controlled, government regulated health care. Well, again, you don't find that in Scripture. You do find that in the Communist Manifesto. Now, I understand I just alienated a whole bunch of my listeners now, but I'm just trying to show you, if you have bought into those kinds of concepts, if you think that there should be such a thing as a public school system, you've bought into Marxism. If you think there should be government-controlled healthcare, you've bought into Marxism. If you believe that there should be government welfare programs, you've bought into Marxism. I'm serious. And how did we buy into that? Well, we bought into it because you were saturated in those thoughts from the time you were little in a Marxist school. 85% of evangelicals send their children to Marxist indoctrination centers. So my first point will be, and actionable items, is that you have to get your kids out of those Marxist indoctrination centers if you want to have any hope of being able to break this chain of Marxist thinking. And I have written on these issues. I have many articles on my blog, christianworldview.net/blog, where I talk about a biblical theology of charity. So please don't think that I am unsympathetic to the poor or that I'm saying Christians shouldn't help the poor. Of course, Christians should help the poor. Jesus commanded us to help the poor, but he commanded it to do it from our own will and not by force. When you look at 2 Corinthians 9:7, the Apostle Paul, when discussing a biblical theology of charity, he says, everyone should give as they have decided in their own heart, speaking of charity, and that no one should be forced to give to charity under compulsion. Well, that's what tax-based government welfare programs are. It is giving to charity by force under compulsion. The Apostle Paul says that should never happen. It's an anti-biblical idea. It's a pro-Marxist idea. You see it in the Communist Manifesto, this concept of the redistribution of wealth and, you know, giving from, taking from one person to give to another. But it's not a biblical idea. And so if we want to eventually have a generation that does not think in terms of Marxist ideologies and can present biblical solutions to these ideas, then we need to develop a biblical worldview, and you got to get your kids out of government schools. And maybe Timothy and I need to come back and do a whole webinar on what a biblical view of charity is. But another thing, this is another fallacy. Some people say, well, yeah, the government shouldn't be taking care of welfare. The church is supposed to do that. And when you say that, it basically indicates that you haven't studied this from a biblical viewpoint. There's no command in the New Testament for the church as a collective body to give from the church's government fund or the church's collective funds to the poor. Not only is there no command for the church to do it, there's no example that the first century church ever did it. The responsibility for charity is not to the church. The role of the church is to disciple believers. That's the role of the church, and to teach us how to think with a biblical worldview. The biblical role of charity is for the individual and the family, and then the church. The only poor that they ever subsidized was the poor within their own church, within the Christian community, on a one-time gift basis as there was a need. And the only groups that were ever subsidized on an ongoing basis were widows indeed, as we see in Timothy, and that had to be a very narrow set of women who were over a certain age, who did not have family to take care of them and had demonstrated a lifetime of service. So I don't have time to get into all of that here, but I'm just saying we've just bought into these ideas that, oh, the government's supposed to take care of welfare, or the church is supposed to take care of welfare. Neither of those concepts is even remotely biblical. We just parrot what we've heard. We just, pastors say it, and so we repeat it. But it's actually the individual and the family in the Bible that are given the responsibility for charity. And we have a mandate to help the poor as individuals and family. And in fact, we're told that if a man doesn't provide for his own family and his own household, he's denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So taking care of those in your own family and as an individual giving to the poor is commanded by Jesus and it's commanded by the apostles. We just need to develop a biblical theology of this. So maybe we'll come back and do that at a different time. So number one, get your kids out of government schools. I've written some books that will be very helpful for you in that. Answers for Homeschooling, the top 25 questions critics ask, I think is probably the best introduction book to home education as someone is just looking into it. And then my book, Education, Does God Have an Opinion? A biblical apologetic for Christian education and homeschooling. That book really establishes a biblical philosophy of education. Number two, people get their kids through 12 years of school in a Christian school or homeschool environment, and then they send them to a college, and about 85% of young people who profess faith in Christ entering their freshman year of college deny their faith by the end of their freshman year. We're seeing a phenomenal fallout of young people at the college level. So we really need to think strategically about the issue of college, because from a worldview standpoint, they're just getting assassinated out there. And so I talk about this again in my books. I encourage you to read Raising Them Up, Parenting for Christians, as well as my education books, to learn how to help equip your child to be ready for the real world and to be firm in their convictions and beliefs. But also we need to think strategically about not just following the path that everybody else follows. There's a lot of young people that should never go to college. In fact, I would say this: I think we should presume that our children should not go to college unless the Lord makes it very clear that they should. I'll just throw that out there. Churches, this is point number three. So point number one, get your kids out of government school. Point number two, avoid college unless the Lord makes it clear you're supposed to go there. Number three, the churches need to start thinking about decentralization. The larger a church is, the more centralized it is, the more easy it is for the government to control that church. And I think increasingly we're going to need to see churches be flexible and have the ability to decentralize and maybe even go underground if they have to. That will mean that a lot of churches will need to form as secret churches who will not incorporate and not become 501c3 corporations. And some churches who have become 501c3 corporations may need to look at rescinding that corporate status and decentralizing, because they're going to be controlled and threatened with having their tax exempt status taken away from them. And many churches simply will never do that because that cuts off their money pipeline. And so they're very easy to control and they're susceptible to compromise, because ultimately, while they would say it's not the need to keep the doors open at all costs and to keep the money flowing is preeminent for them. And so economics really drives their decisions rather than biblical convictions. So number 4, we need true Christian community. And by that, I don't mean Facebook communities. I mean people that you actually know and that you trust and that you're in a relationship with. If you have those relationships, don't take them for granted. Nurture them, cultivate them. Be willing to work it out through the difficult times. If you don't have those relationships, pray for them and find them, seek them out, because they're going to be so important moving forward. Number 5, fight debt like it's your mortal enemy, because it is. Debt keeps you from being able to make the best choices for your family. It reduces your options, and you want to be able to travel light, to be able to be economically able to pivot as changes happen rapidly in culture. Being free from debt will enable you to do that. So that may require downsizing. It may require selling off things that are not necessary, but find a way to streamline, simplify your life. Along with that, find ways to diversify your current income. This is point number 7, because a lot of people can't control their employment. I mean, we're seeing that now with these vaccination mandates. People are losing their jobs if they won't comply. And religious exemptions are being overlooked. I mean, it's terribly unconstitutional, but it's happening. And it's not just a vaccine issue. It's going to be other things. It'll be the diversity training. It'll be hate crime legislation. There'll be so many things where people will be removed from their employment because they don't follow a politically correct ideology. So you need to have more than one revenue stream. I would encourage you to consider starting family businesses. I've written on this in the past. In fact, I have an audio presentation on things to consider before you start a family business. And the goal is not to quit your day job and start a family business from scratch. It is to start a family business, learn how to do that, and then if it gets to the point where it is economically viable enough to support your family, then you have the option of switching over if you choose. But you'll want to get that up and running for probably 3 to 5 years before you consider quitting your day job. So now's the best time to start if you haven't done that yet. I also would say, if possible, consider growing your own food. Make sure you have several months of food storage, not to be paranoid, but because infrastructure can easily be disrupted. We saw that during the COVID crisis, the run on toilet paper, which, you know, created a lot of funny memes on Facebook, but it also can create catastrophes when people can't get food and basic necessities. And our distribution line is so fragile that you need to have some options. So having supplies for a few months ahead of food and basic necessities is just wisdom. It's not hoarding, it's not paranoia, it's not, you know, well, it's not preparing for the zombie apocalypse. It's just being smart. There's a proverb that says that the wise person or the prudent person sees the evil day and makes preparation for it. And so recognizing that only takes a few things, a hurricane, natural disaster, a few bumps in the road, maybe a terrorist attack on a major infrastructure, and you don't have goods. And so finding alternative ways to be able to get access to those things. I don't have this in my notes, but I also, in this economic side, I want to say, with hyperinflation and the devaluing of the dollar as very likely potentials for the spending that's happening within our governmental system, you may also really want to look at buying tangible assets, because if you own something, you own it. And when the dollar is devalued, tangible assets go up. And I'm not going to tell you what to invest in because I'm not a financial consultant, but you have to have a place to live. So owning a house is a tangible asset. You have to live somewhere. So I personally think that investing in a house is a good idea, investing in property, investing in something that can produce more revenue. Those things are good ideas, but something that can hold its value and something that can earn you revenue as a means of production, those are good ideas. Number 9, you really have to educate yourself on these issues. You're here, so I appreciate that. You're already doing that. You're trying to learn more about these issues and how they affect your family. Again, I encourage you to buy that seminar. the video seminar that is 2 parts, and they go together. You got to listen to both, on postmodernism, cultural Marxism, critical theory, which includes critical legal studies, critical race theory, and then the issue of social justice and intersectionality. That's all covered in a very kind of historic chronological way with PowerPoint. That's available at familyrenewal.org/store. We have had some problems with people who are trying to download them on their phones, and the video files are big, so we're going to work on a alternate system for that. But if you have problems with that, just go to the contact form on our website, send us an email, and we will send you links so that you can download those if you have trouble utilizing them with your smartphones. So continue to educate yourself. We're going to be putting out more of these webinars. Make sure you're on my email list so that you can be aware of new resources that we're going to be producing. You can do that at familyrenewal.org/subscribe. And we want to be able to keep in touch with you that way. Of course, follow me on social media so we can keep in touch there. Number 10, I would encourage you to shift some of your free time into action, to find something that you believe in, a cause that is important to you, and to donate your time to that cause. I think we as Christians, we don't think like the liberals do, again, in that the liberals always spend their money in their own ideological community, and they don't support ours financially, because they want their ideological community to grow and they want ours to shrink. And they volunteer time to causes that they believe in. And what we Christians do is we spend thousands and thousands of dollars supporting our ideological enemies. And I don't mean that in terms of, thinking of people as our enemies, although Jesus did say, love your enemy. So he does recognize that that's a valid category. But I'm saying there are people who are ideological enemies. They're on the total opposite side of our worldview, and they're seeking to destroy our way of life. And those people are funded largely by evangelicals. Christians support Disney. They'll go to Disney and spend $5,000 or more on a vacation, and they won't go support something like the Ark Encounter or the Creation Museum. That doesn't make sense to me, because what you fund grows and what doesn't get funded shrinks. Disney has proven over and over again that they are not our ideological friends, but they are actually working for the leftist progressives. Starbucks has said, if you're a conservative, we don't want or need your business. But yet Christians continue to support Starbucks, even though they've made it really plain that they're working for the other side. And I understand. I have a blog article as well that's not on the Christian Worldview blog. It's published with Illinois Family Institute, but it was called Beyond Boycotting to Stewardship. I'm not saying that we can successfully boycott every company that disagrees with us. That's not my point. But my point is, there are times where you have a choice between a company that is flagrantly anti-Christian, anti-traditional family, anti-conservative values, anti-American, and a company that, just sells good coffee, right? Well, that's an easy choice in my mind. If there is a company that you can very easily support financially, as opposed to one that is opposed to your ideology, I encourage you to do that. And then to give your time to a cause that you believe in, whether that's working in Christian education, volunteering for pro-life organizations. Again, your church could probably use your help, being involved in serving in your local church community. But giving of your time, you need to show your children that you are not just someone who believes in certain ideologies, but that you're willing to put feet to your beliefs, and that you're willing to get out and get involved. Maybe that is a political action. Maybe that is helping a candidate that's running in your district to get elected. I personally believe that we have very little control over this on a macro level, that we as individuals can't just snap our fingers and do these 3 magic things and turn our nation around. We have billions and billions of school children, even Christians, who have been indoctrinated in government schools around the world over the past 50 years. And they're being indoctrinated into Marxism. You're not going to turn that around quickly. but what can we do? We can be responsible for ourselves, for our families, and our sphere of influence. And that's what we have to focus on. That's what we need to pay attention to. What can we do for ourselves as we go through this time of cultural upheaval? And so educating ourselves, educating our children, thinking of strategically about our finances, getting out of debt, making sure that we are investing in things that can help produce more revenue, things that are tangible assets that will hold their value even if the economy collapses, looking for ways to support each other in Christian community, finding ways to support those who support our ideology and defund those who are antagonistic towards our beliefs. These things are just common sense. And I just feel like these things shouldn't even have to be said. I feel like these are things that should be so obvious that we just all intuitively know it and do it. I don't see that happening. I see 85% of Christian evangelicals sending their children to Marxist schools, atheist Marxist schools. I see them supporting, sometimes with thousands and thousands of discretionary dollars, organizations that have stated that they hate Christianity, they hate our values, they hate our country even. Why are we funding them? And you know, I just think there's a time. I'll give you a quick example. A friend of mine said that he and his brothers and his sons have supported fantasy football for a lot of years, which is like a virtual NFL game, I guess, that you can participate in. And I don't remember if it's $50 a year per person or something like that, but he said he and his brothers and sons had done this, and he just was looking at how woke the NFL has become and how they've really become just a stage for promoting a certain political agenda, a leftist, progressive socialist agenda. And he said he just didn't feel like the Lord wanted him to keep spending his money in that direction. So he and his sons actually backed out, said they weren't going to be a part of it, and they were going to cut off that money from going to the NFL because the NFL makes money on that revenue. And he said his brothers didn't understand it and they got mad because this is just something fun that they do together and they see it as just a fun thing. But he saw it as, you know, I want to put this money into something that's actually going to be building the kingdom of God and investing in my family in a more positive way that's aligned with my values. And so we need to start thinking more strategically in that direction. So I do want to make sure I take time for some of your questions if there are specific questions related to this, and we can either come back and address them in a future webinar, or maybe I have already written something that I can direct you to.
You've provided so many good things for us today, so much understanding, so much actionable steps, and particularly biblically aligned steps. I am so thankful for your biblical worldview and your willingness to speak truth. In fact, there's been some comments today that have come in throughout the webinar mentioning how appreciative people are for you sharing truth, even when you might, as you said, alienate some people. You know, it's shocking sometimes to consider how much we have been influenced, how much we've changed some of our thoughts and patterns, and maybe even some of us have seen other Christians change in these ways. And it's a little surprising, but it does seem to matter that, like you said, whatever you feed grows. And so we've got to keep feeding on the word. We've got to keep fellowshipping with other Christians. We've got to keep looking at what God says, that we can control what he wants us to do. And I really appreciate the ministry of Family Renewal and your commitment to help people think and act biblically. We do have one question here that you haven't seemingly answered along the way. It's kind of specific. What are your thoughts on the Convention of the States that has the goal to invoke Article 5 of the Constitution to bring control back to the states?
Yeah, boy, that's a really dicey issue. I know my friend Michael Ferris has promoted the concept of the Convention of the States. I have other friends who believe that it's dangerous to in any way attempt to change the U.S. Constitution. They also feel that by throwing the power back to the states to be able to amend or change the Constitution, that you know, our country is increasingly shifting to the left, and that that we could open up Pandora's box by doing that. I will say I'm not a constitutional expert. I have friends on both sides of that issue that I respect, that I think have a tremendous love for our country and appreciation for our Constitution, who are for and against that as a methodology. I think what I would say at the end is that the last word that I heard from Michael Ferris on that is that there's absolutely no way that that's a possibility from a strategy standpoint right now. The votes aren't there. There's not a possibility of that actually being implemented. So I think what I'll do is I'll punt on the idea and say, according to, you know, one of the strongest proponents of that idea, it's really not on the table at present as being a viable action point, at least not from his viewpoint last I heard. So, you know, I understand and am sympathetic to the desire, and I think part of that came out of the desire originally for the parental rights amendment, to say that we needed to have an amendment that protects parental rights in the U.S. Constitution, because if we ratify the UN Convention on the Child, which was signed during the Clinton administration, but was never ratified, if we ratify that, it dramatically removes parental rights in the United States. And so there was a thought that we could have a parental rights amendment to the Constitution, but that kind of led to, how would we get that done when we don't have enough votes? And then the whole, you know, send it back to the Convention of States. And so it's a really good question. I have not entirely made up my mind as to the validity of that as a strategy, whether that's shrewd or whether it's dangerous. But I would say it's kind of a moot point at this point, because from what I've heard, there's just not there's not even a potential of that happening at the moment. So I would say it's off the table as a strategy point, and you probably have to talk to better constitutional experts than myself to get a better opinion on that.
A few of you have asked the same question, and let me repeat the answers that I've given to some in there. Yes, we are recording this webinar. Everyone who registers for the webinars that we do will receive an email the following day from the broadcast that will give you, whether you've attended live or not, an access link to watch the recordings. And the second piece is that, yes, because this is recorded, if people go to the Facebook post, let's say you share it with some specific friends and tag them in it and say, you've got to watch this. Or if you take that registration link and just send it to people and say, hey, check this out. Yes, they will be able to, like you, simply put their name and email in, and boom, that recording will automatically show up and they can start watching it right away. So thank you for your interest in not just being here and hearing this and learning it yourself, but also with your willingness to share it with others. I'm also excited to let you know that this is the first of 6 webinars that we have planned to host with Israel Wayne of Family Renewal. And we are going to be covering some topics like preparing for civil disobedience, why aren't Christian pastors holding the line, who owns the children, you know, there's a number that are coming. So every couple of weeks on Wednesdays, we're going to get back for another one of these topics and continue to share. And so keep watching on Facebook, keep watching your emails, make certain that you are paying attention, and thank you so much for sharing them with others. Israel, there's another couple of questions that are all tying kind of together here. One particular lady she's got her eyes wide open, she's understanding, she's seeing all these things that you're talking about, but her husband isn't. And in fact, seems like not interested at all in paying attention and engaging. And so it's creating a little bit of difficulty there, maybe even some discouragement. What would you say to one spouse who's seeing it and wants to do some of these things, but the other spouse isn't seeing it or wanting to engage?
Well, I'm going to give some resources. I'll list a few resources, so people might want to grab a pen and paper to have handy to write things down. If someone is not interested in new information, then they won't learn anything new. It's that simple. So in order for someone to grow, to mature, to evolve, if I can use that term, to continue to progress, they're going to have to take in new information. If they're not interested, there's not much that can be done there. But if they are willing to consider some new information, I'm going to give you a list of resources that most of which I don't sell, but that are really valuable and timely, I think, right now. So one book that I would recommend is a book by Rod Dreher. It's a Dreher, Rod Dreher, and his book is called Live Not by Lies. And one of the things that he did was he went to Eastern Europe. He talked to people who had lived under communism, and he asked them about their impressions of what they're seeing happening in the United States and in Canada and other parts of the world. And you know, these things that we're talking about here, the hostile takeover of America. Had a Facebook friend wrote me and said, please mention Canada, because actually Canada's further along in a lot of this than we are, and England, and you know, we could go on and on, New Zealand, Australia, and other parts of Western Europe. But anyway, what he did was he went to these communist nations, said, what do you see happening in the West? And they said they were shocked at how we were inviting things into our country that they had fought to try to get rid of. And one of the examples that they used was that they grew up in homes that were wiretapped by the government, and they were shocked to find that Americans were actually paying to wiretap their own homes and have that information go out to major corporations and to the government as well. And so Rod Dreher's book, Live Not by Lies, is a good one. Erwin Lutzer has a couple of books. We Will Not Be Silenced is an excellent book that deals with these issues, as well as an older book. I don't remember the title. The subtitle was something like Lessons Learned from Nazi Germany, both by Erwin Lutzer, former pastor at Moody Church. I would recommend a book that we sell called Truth in a World of Lies by Steve Gallagher, and we sell that at the familyrenewal.org/store site. Fabulous book, one of the best that I've read within the last year. Most people have heard of at least Voddie Baucham's new book, Fault Lines, which deals with critical race theory. Very important book. There's also a DVD documentary called Agenda, Grinding Down of America by Curtis Bowers. Two videos. It's actually Agenda 1 and Agenda 2. Both of those videos give you the big picture. So for a guy that won't read, that might be the best place to start. Sometimes a guy will watch a documentary, watch a video. But Agenda, Volume 1 and Volume 2, those two videos will really give you the big picture of how cultural Marxism has infiltrated our country. So those are some resources that come to mind that I think are timely. Obviously, there are many others, but I would make those a short list of things that you should try to read within the next 6 months if you have the opportunity.
Have you got time for a couple more questions?
I do.
They are pouring in.
Good. And thank you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in here. I know you have a lot going on, so I appreciate your time.
Someone has mentioned that, oh, I'm so sorry, it just came up. Your first recommendation about withdrawing children from government schools, this particular person said it was something that they felt the Lord impressed upon them before they ever had children, but it came under fire, not from the government, but from within their church.
Yeah.
And it got messy.
Yeah.
It got messy. There was exhortation to regularly put the kids in school so they could have a schedule, respect authority. She had to stand alone in this process,
right.
Even from the council of the church and those in authority. Her question is, how can we exhort the homeschooling family or those who are thinking of doing so to stay the course when discouraged from within the church?
Yeah. Well, I wrote an entire book on that. It's called Answers for Homeschooling, the Top 25 Questions Critics Ask. And that book is really a book of apologetics for why homeschooling is the best option from both a research standpoint, but also a biblical standpoint. I wrote it to help people to be able to speak to two different kinds of critics. The external critic, whether it be their pastor, their in-laws, their relatives, their neighbors, their friends, coworkers, whatever. Or the other critic is sometimes the critic in your own head, the critic who says, I don't think I'm qualified for this. I don't think I can do this. I think my children are going to miss out. What if they are deprived in their education? What if they're socially maladjusted? So you either have critics outside of you or critics within. And I systematically go through just about every conceivable objection that gets raised against homeschooling and just dismantle all of those arguments and objections. So I really think Answers for Homeschooling is the best book on the market for helping the discouraged homeschooler to be able to have answers and facts and research that they can use to support their decision to homeschool. And also, let me throw this in. Some people immediately go and buy my books on Amazon, and I've been saying this more frequently, but if you buy my book on Amazon, I make about 65 cents because Amazon keeps almost all of the profits. And so I would strongly encourage you, if you can at all, to purchase them from our website, which is familyrenewal.org/store. And if you order from our website, I'll personally sign your copy, which is something Amazon won't do. But that actually enables you to fund our ministry rather than funding Amazon, who is going to be just fine without your financial support. So I'll just throw that out there. They're going to be okay.
I will say amen to that.
They're doing all right. They're doing all
right. And Amazon's one of those companies that we should critically consider whether we should even be a part of, to your point earlier, with some of the things that they're doing. Some of the things they're supporting. So I would definitely encourage people to get the resources directly from you as opposed to Amazon for both purposes. There's 3 or 4 questions that are coming in. Let me see if I can get you to just sort of generally bring this into a scope. There's someone asking, should we be focusing just on our state, getting good legislatures in to stop the mandates and stop socialist agendas? There's another, should we come alongside support of a state looking to succeed from the union? There's a number of questions here. Would you just generally address your thoughts about the political involvement Christians should have right now in these areas? I think you'll answer a handful of questions by answering that one.
Yeah. Well, there's a book called The Doctrine of the Lesser Magistrates that you might want to look up that addresses a lot of those kinds of issues. And really what it talks about is the importance of understanding that we're built on a rule of law. So, we are a lex rex society, not a rex lex. We believe law is king, not the king is law. And so, as Samuel Rutherford wrote about. So we believe that if someone is making an edict or an order that is unlawful, that's unconstitutional, that is dictatorial, that's malevolent, that is taking away our clearly stated, liberties, that lower or lesser magistrates have to stand in a place of interposition between those dictators and the people. And we have seen that. We've seen that in the last year with sheriffs who have said, we will not enforce our governor's edicts. We've seen that with governors who have said, we will not enforce these executive orders from the president. And so I would encourage you, I think the author, forgetting the name right now, Matthew Trewhella, I think is his name, The Doctrine of Lesser Magistrate. Good food for thought. Not going to say 100% endorse everything in the book, but good food for thought. And I think the general idea is correct that we need to begin to think about how anyone who is in a position of having taken an oath to defend the Constitution needs to do so against tyrants in our own country. And so there are going to be moments, I think, where lesser magistrates are going to have to take a stand. And thankfully, we've seen some doing that. As far as a state seceding, I don't think that's probably viable in terms of actually happening. But boy, stranger things have happened this last 18 months, right? Who knows? Maybe South Dakota or Texas always talks about it. But I don't know. I don't know that that solves all of the problems necessarily. But I do understand the sentiment behind that. That if we just are going to have presidents that make executive orders, really before the 1980s, I would say we didn't have a lot of executive orders. It's kind of gone nutsy, especially since the Clinton administration, and we just have seen that's how law gets made now, as presidents just make up executive orders and skip Congress altogether. It's a really unconstitutional model. But so I don't think we're going to see any states secede in the near future. And I don't know enough about the implications. We've never seen what that would look like. So we don't have any historical background to fall on and say, this would be the long-term repercussions of it. But I certainly do think that we need to focus on what we can do on a local level and a state level to put people in place that can push back against this, because thank God we have seen some governors that have shown strong leadership, even in the face of ridicule and pressure from the federal government. And I think we need people to do that at the different levels of their jurisdiction.
So many people expressing their deep appreciation and gratefulness for what you have shared today. There's a lot more information that Israel could have shared. I really encourage you on this particular topic to go to familyrenewal.org, go to the store and find your copy of the seminar on cultural Marxism and the like. Get those 2 one-hour videos. You will put into action one of the action plans that he has recommended today is to study, to learn, to know the issues, to understand what is happening. And then beyond that, there are multiple resources. I was able to post in the chat the recommended books that he was putting out there, along with a number of other things. We have really loaded you up today with resources, and I hope that you will take advantage of that. And Israel, thank you again for your biblical worldview, your sincere Christian faith. Thank you for your commitment to helping people gain this biblical worldview and experience family renewal as they think and act biblically. There is much more to come. Look out on the weeks ahead. We have more webinars. Thank you all for sharing and joining us today. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and may he cause his face to shine upon you and to give you his peace. Thanks again, Israel.
God bless. Thank you.